Okay, so we're back on the book. Get on my funky glasses and let's get started. Okay, I'm trying to figure out where I left off, and I believe it was chapter 13 with Leo Tolstoy. So let's get right to it. Let's pitter patter. Let's get at her. So it says Tolstoy is universally regarded as one of the great novelists of all time, with both War and Peace and Anna Karenina still held up as masterpieces of fiction. Really liked War and Peace. Did not like Anna Karenina. Few are aware that he was also an explicit committed anarchist. I did not know that at the time I read the book, so I did know that now. In his nonfiction, Tolstoy set out to explain how a stateless society is superior, as well as possible mechanisms to transition to such a preferable form of human organization. All righty, here we go. And I have all kinds of underlining because I didn't have a highlighter. I think I was doing this while at camping. I can't remember. The cause of the miserable condition of the workers is slavery. The cause of slavery is legislation. I think I want to tweet that. Legislation rests on organized violence. That's a good sentence, too. It follows that an improvement in the condition of the people is possible only through the abolition of organized violence. But organized violence is government, and how can we live without governments? Without governments, there will be chaos, anarchy. All the achievements of civilization will perish, and people will revert to their primitive barbarism. God, that sounds familiar. Nothing changes. This is from 1900. It is usual, not only for those to whom the existing order is profitable, but even for those to whom it is evidently unprofitable, but who are so accustomed to it, to say they cannot imagine life without governmental violence, to say we must not dare to touch the existing order of things. The state organization is extremely artificial and unstable, and the fact that the least push may destroy it not only does not prove that it is necessary, but on the contrary, shows that if once upon a time it was necessary, it is now absolutely unnecessary and is therefore harmful and dangerous. Why think that non-official people could not arrange their lives themselves as well as government people arrange it, not for themselves, but for others? Says the defense of landed property by governmental violence not merely does not abolish the struggle for landed property, but on the contrary, strengthens that struggle and in many cases causes it. Tens of thousands of acres of forest lands belonging to one proprietor, while thousands of people close by have no fuel, needs protection by violence. So too do factories and works where several generations of workmen have been defrauded and are still being defrauded. I can't remember whether he was coming from a commie perspective. I think it was kind of in the middle, if I remember correctly. No, it looks like it's pretty commie. I couldn't remember, but this book is a mixed bag. Only attempt to abolish the rights of property in land and in the produce of labor, and no one... Wait. I'm trying to find, I underlined this and I think I missed the context. So let's see if we can figure it out. Because he says, it is generally said, only attempt to abolish the rights of property in land and in the produce of labor, and no one will take the trouble to work, lacking the assurance that he will not be deprived of what he has produced. So that actually sounds like something a libertarian might say. So he's going to argue against that. We should say just the opposite. The defense by violence of the rights of property immorally obtained, but I agree you shouldn't, well, it depends on what he's defining as immorally, if he thinks rights to property in general are immoral, or whether some is moral and some is immoral, which is now customary. If it is not quite destroyed, has considerably weakened people's natural consciousness of justice and the matter of using articles, the natural and innate right of property, without which humanity could not exist and which has always existed and still exists upon man. See, he's confusing me because now he's sounding not commie. Somebody, well, I'm acting like I'm doing this live and you all could tell me. says, power is always seized by those who are less conscientious and less moral. It is said, how can people live without governments, i.e. without violence? But it should, on the contrary, be asked, how can people who are rational live, acknowledging that the vital bond of their social life is violence and not reasonable agreement? All attempts to get rid of governments by violence have hitherto, always and everywhere resulted only in this, that in place of the deposed governments, new ones established themselves, often more cruel than those they replaced. So attempts to abolish violence by violence neither have in the past nor evidently in the future emancipate people from violence nor consequently from slavery. It cannot be otherwise. All the attempts to abolish slavery by violence are like extinguishing fire with fire, stopping water with water, or filling up one hole by digging another. Therefore, the means of escape from slavery, if such means exist, must be found not in setting up fresh violence, but in abolishing whatever renders governmental violence possible. And the possibility of governmental violence, like every other violence perpetrated by a small number of people upon a larger number, has always depended, and still depends, simply on the fact that the small number are armed, while the large number are unarmed, or that the small number are better armed than the large number. God, that is so true, even today. So that, if formerly, in order to get rid of armed violence, it was necessary to arm oneself and to oppose armed violence by armed violence, now when people are subdued, not by direct violence, but by fraud, in order to abolish violence, it is only necessary to expose the deception which enables a small number of people to exercise violence upon a larger number. And he talks about the difficulty of this because people are born into this very system. Towards governments, as towards churches, it is impossible to feel otherwise than with veneration or aversion. So in combating this, Tolstoy says a man must not himself do those wrong things which enslave him and his brothers. And in order not to do the evil which produces misery for himself and his brothers, he should, and I would disagree somewhat here, but this is his philosophy, he should first of all neither willingly nor under compulsion take any part in governmental activity, and therefore should be neither a soldier nor a field marshal, nor a minister of state, nor a tax collector, nor a witness, nor an alderman, nor a juryman, nor a governor, nor a member of parliament, nor in fact hold any office connected with violence. Here's where I disagree, quite obviously because I'm involved with politics. It was in his term fresh violence. I think that makes a difference. And his observation that we are born into this system. So you're born into stasis. Like, this is the level of violence that already exists. It's inevitable. It's nearly inescapable. And if you use the system to then reduce and not cause fresh violence, I just do not see that as a problem. Secondly, such a man should not voluntarily pay taxes to government. See, this sounds like a suicide pact. Either directly or indirectly, nor should he accept any money collected by taxes, either as a salary or a pension, or as a reward, nor should he make use of governmental institutions. That's just, maybe in 1900 that was possible. It isn't. Supported by taxes collected by violence from the people. It's also violently connected from him, and getting some back of what was stolen from you. You're not the one committing the violence. The state is. That is the second thing. Thirdly, a man who desires not to promote his own well-being alone, but to better the position of people in general, should not appeal to government violence for the protection of his own possessions and land. But when government has monopolized the protection, he might as well say, and if I remember correctly, Tolstoy was a pacifist, which I am as well. So I'm sympathetic to his point of view. But what he's describing sounds like a suicide pact to me. Nor to defend him and his near ones. So much more extremist of a pacifist, I suppose, than I am. I have a very narrow pacifism. And it's strictly from a Christian point of view. I don't think defensive force is inherently immoral. I just think God calls Christians to put aside certain things, not because they are wrong, but sacrificially. Okay. It is quite true that it is difficult for a man of our times to stand aside from all participation in governmental violence. But the fact that not everyone can so arrange his life as to not participate in some degree in governmental violence does not at all show that it is not possible to free oneself from it more and more. Now, I'd agree with that you should, if you can avoid it, yes, and still work to free your fellow men. There is only one way to abolish governmental violence, that people should abstain from participating in violence. Okay, that was it for Tolstoy. So we're going to go on to the next one, which is chapter 14, Alexander Berkman. And this was written in 1906. It's called Prisons and Crime. Inspired by his mentor, Johann Most, Alexander Berkman decided to take matters into his own hands, oh God, and engage in an attentat. I've never heard that word before, which is assassination, of Andrew Carnegie's lieutenant, Henry Clay Frick, in 1892. Frick was overseeing the Homestead strike in Pennsylvania, and matters had already turned deadly. Berkman failed to kill Frick, and his actions were disavowed by his mentor's name, remember, was Mr. Most. So it says by Most, meaning Mr. Most. And then in parentheses, Michael Malice says and most, meaning most people. He ended up serving a decade in prison, eventually penning Prison Memoirs of an Anarchist. How to deal with criminals is one of the biggest questions people have of the anarchist perspective. Here, Berkman gives one possible anarchist framework with which to study the issue. And there was only a few things that I highlighted from this chapter that just gave some food for thought. He says, punishment as a social institution is but another form of revenge, with the state in the role of the sole legal avenger of the collective citizen, the same well-defined spirit of barbarism in disguise. The penal powers of the state rest theoretically on the principle that in organized society, an injury to one is the concern of all. And that's definitely not a libertarian concept. And the wronged citizen, society as a whole, is attacked. This modern form of civilized revenge kills, figuratively speaking, the enemy of the individual citizen, but breeds in his place the enemy of society. Society had made him an outcast, so it is his natural enemy. No one had shown him either kindness or mercy, so he will be merciless to the world. Then he's released. His former friends spurn him. He is no more recognized by his acquaintances. Society points its finger at the ex-convict. He is looked upon with scorn, derision, and disgust. He is distrusted and abused. He has no money, and there is no charity for the moral leper. He finds himself a social Ishmael, with everybody's hand turned against him, and thus he turns his hand against everyone else. So I think there's some very interesting food for thought there, particularly when you see in criminal cases, it's not, Mr. Jones versus Mr. Smith. It's the state versus Mr. Smith. All right, what's coming up next is Voltairine Declare, and that's chapter 15. And I like looking at how many pages these things are, so that's not very long. It's about 15 pages. And then Emma Goldman, who I definitely have heard of, and it looks like she has a very short chapter. about 6 pages. So those will be the next few that we do, and we're more than halfway through. Did this all in one sitting. Yay!